In the meantime, the disciples pressed him, "Rabbi, eat. Aren't you going to eat?" He told them, "I have food to eat you know nothing about." The disciples were puzzled. Who could have brought him food? Jesus said, "The food that keeps me going is that I do the will of the one who sent me, finishing the work he started."
At the beginning of the service, when we were just gathering, Evelyn came and she had a bag, and in the bag she had 2 Bibles. And she asked me what I thought about which translation she might read, one being the more traditional, the kind of text that we're accustomed to, and one being this newer version written by Mr. Gene Peterson, I believe it is, from Regent's College in Vancouver, called The Message. And at first I thought, well, these folks are old, let's just go with the old. And then I thought, no, I'm talking about change, let's go with the new. But what I like about Mr. Peterson's translation is that what he does is he takes concepts that come from the Hebrew and the Greek mind and have passed through all the ages, passed through all kinds of societies, have been interpreted and represented in all kinds of translations. And that seems to say that in each generation we need to listen again to hear not what the Bible said a long time ago, but what's the Bible saying to us right now. And I love this story about the woman at the well. But I'd like to begin by sharing with you something that is very important to me, and it was at our wedding day that I first mentioned how important this was when I had to make a little speech, and rather than to speak the kinds of ideas that I speak with you here in church, I said as simply as possible, anything I could probably say to you about life you can learn by watching Little House on the Prairie. And that was it. That's all I had to say that day, and that's rare for me. Yeah, thank you. Why are you laughing? But last week, there was just a fine example of why it is that I admire the producers and the actors and all the people who worked together to put this show in front of us, because it communicates some remarkable values from a time past that we might do well to adopt now. And in the episode that I was watching, there was a young boy, he was probably 15 or 16, in his adolescence, and he was in town with his dad, but he was apart from everybody. He was alone. You see, he was deaf and he was mute. And Dad left him by the road, and Dad was going into the store. But in the meanwhile, another young fella, the little Olsen boy, he lit a string of firecrackers. Pap, 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 pap. And there was a team of horses in front of the store, and the horses got startled by the firecrackers, and they bolted down the road. They were runaways. And little Laura Ingalls was watching this from the side. She was with her mom and dad shopping. And she saw this boy, and she saw these horses, and without thinking, that's my interpretation, she jumped into action, and she pushed that boy out of the way of those horses and that wagon just in the nick of time. She saved his life. And that was at the physical level. But as the story goes on, it moves into the spiritual level. And that's when Laura realizes that this boy has got a real disadvantage in life by not being able to hear and not being able to speak. He's a little bit like the people Jesus meets when he's walking along the road. There's blind people, there's lame people. They are people who can't live the fullness of life because they're lacking some ability. Well, Laura makes a decision, and she asks Mom and Dad if it's okay, and they say it's okay. In fact, they're kind of proud. She decides that she's going to get involved with this young boy, and she's going to help him learn how to communicate. And what she does is she begins to work with him, and at first it's a bit slow. She makes signs like, does anybody know what this is? Anyway, in the story, it was window. And then there was a door, and then she'd show him things. And after a while, he began to make the connection. And Laura and this young boy began to communicate with one another. He was learning how to speak. He wasn't making sounds out of his mouth, but he was speaking with his hands. And they began to become friends. And then the dad noticed this, because the dad had always thought the best thing to do was just to keep the boy hidden so he wouldn't be embarrassed and ashamed. And that's often what people do when they've got some vulnerability. But Laura begins to teach the dad. And pretty soon the dad and the boy are talking to each other. And what I'd like to suggest is that theologians who are serious about the gospel of Jesus would never say, this is a miracle. But if you would ask the dad, if you would ask the boy, if you would ask all the folks who knew this boy, who once could not speak, and now he could speak, this was a miracle. And that miracle happened because one person saw the need and decided to get involved and begin to communicate care and concern, and by that care and concern, admit that young man into a whole new life. And reflecting on that story, it seemed to me so perfectly to explain who it is that Jesus is and who it is that Jesus calls us to be. And the story of the woman at the well is one of my very favorites because it's so ordinary. It's like you and you're with your family or something and you're going to Tim Hortons on a long trip for a little break and you see somebody. But Jesus is walking. He needs some refreshment. They have no food and the disciples go away. And Jesus is alone. And I think Jesus likes to spend time alone because he spends a lot of time with people. And when he's alone, he gets to recharge. He gets to re-energize himself. Then this woman comes and he's not allowed to talk to her by the Jewish religion or the other people's religion. He's not allowed to communicate with her. She's a woman. Anyway, the woman comes and Jesus and she begin to talk together. And out of that talk, something happens which changes this woman's life forever. The insight that Jesus has about what it means to be a human being on the planet communicates to her, and inside of herself, she gets it. It's not about being Jewish. It's not about being Samaritan. It's about being a person. And this woman had a lot of baggage when she met Jesus, just like all of us when we meet Jesus have a lot of baggage. And she's surprised that Jesus somehow knows about her baggage. And she's more surprised that Jesus doesn't hold it against her. Jesus suggests to her that she's lived her life up to this point. It hasn't been a very satisfying life for her. A lot of people have accused her of being a bad person because of the life she'd lived. But Jesus accepts her fully and without condition. And what Jesus does, in effect, is take the love of God that he has in him, and he takes the love of God and he expresses it towards her. You remember the great commandment? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This story is Jesus loving his neighbor. And the question is sometimes asked, who's my neighbor? And in this case, Jesus makes it clear that my neighbor is not inside the fence of what I believe, not inside the fence of what I value, not inside the fence of what I think is most important, but outside the fence. And there's a theologian who said that what Jesus does is that he crosses boundaries to bring the love of God into the experience of those who are excluded by religious, social, and political circumstances. This woman's life is changed by having a conversation with Jesus, with this person who represents God's love in human history. And she goes away, and the first thing she wants to do is tell everybody about it. Something wonderful has happened to me. You should see this person. And then the disciples come back and they got food. And they say to Jesus, come on, eat. You must be pretty hungry by now. And Jesus says to them, I've got food that you don't know nothing about. And those of you who are aware of the scriptures know that it says man or human beings do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. That is to say, our experience as human beings is not limited by material circumstances. That we have a spiritual dimension which we ought also to cultivate as much, if not more, than we cultivate our material well-being. But the world in Jesus' day, just like the world in our day, has been very much preoccupied with the material. That is to say, if we compare the lives that were lived in stories like The Little House on the Prairie or The Waltons, we notice that something has really changed. And what that change is, in the main, a renegotiation or a reprioritizing of what is important. And in those days, what was important was family. What was important was friends. What was important was neighbors. What was important was your community, both your church community and your other communities. But what has happened, and you see this in the stories of The Little House on the Prairie and the Waltons, is that industrialization is beginning to make advances, and capitalism is beginning to make advances, and you realize that the people who live close to the land, the people who live close to older ways, are being threatened. A way of life is being erased. And what is being offered instead is more stuff. More stuff. More stuff. And that pile of stuff from the earliest days of America and Canada and the Western world, that pile of stuff has been growing and growing and growing to the point that it's become a burden to the planet. All the cars, all the electronics, all the things that we make and buy and take pride in and then throw away. It's becoming a burden to the planet. And it's becoming a burden to the people of the planet. Folks are sitting in great big houses with all kinds of wonderful possessions. And they're driving themselves crazy working just to pay for it all, just to keep it solvent. And they're getting anxious inside, and they're getting discouraged inside. And it seems to be, if we look at the evidence, that material things are unable to satisfy human longing, human need. What we require is spirit. And that's what God offers us, spirit. And it's the spirit in persons like Trudy and Abram and little Jack and our friend Jarvis. And in you. And God is inviting all persons everywhere to get engaged with that spirit and to allow that spirit to take root. Now we're in the season of Lent, and we ought to be aware that as Jesus goes around preaching this good news about the simplicity of life, the joy that is found in singing and telling stories and sharing meals together, Jesus is communicating these basic values, and this is causing a problem for the persons who run the social economy. Because everything that they value in their temple and in their fine clothes, you remember the story about the rich man who had a beggar by his gate. He was dressed in fine purple, etc. He ate all the finest foods. All that was going on, and those people didn't like what Jesus was saying. Because what Jesus was saying is that so much of what your leaders expect of you is totally unnecessary. In fact, it's darn harmful. I can give you an example in Canada of how government misuses the trust that we place in it. And this has to do with the question that is being asked by many people about drug addiction among young persons. You see, a little while ago, there were some corporations who had decided that it would be kind of fun to sell sugar water with lots of caffeine in it. They thought maybe they could make some money doing that. So they went to Health Canada and asked for permission. And Health Canada said, well, let's check this out. So they delegated a team of scientists. Now, some people say there's a conflict between science and religion. I don't believe that for a single second. That whatever religion teaches, science will verify. But the scientists who studied these drinks discovered that this was a psychoactive drug that caused the kinds of things that other drugs cause. And the scientists were unanimous. Whatever you do, don't let this product be sold to kids. Don't let this product be sold at all. And if you are going to sell it, be sure that you label it, "This is a drug which will bring harmful consequences." But if you go to any store in Canada right now, you will see displays of these caffeine sugar drinks. And you will see young people coming in to buy them, right? And you'll see the big corporations making money. But the science says this stuff is killing our kids. Now, we have our leaders. They want to know all about the big fancy drugs. But if the government, in the case of this small, simple drug, is willing to bow down in front of the corporations, why would we expect kids not to buy in? You see, governments right now are not loyal to their people anymore. Governments right now are loyal to power. And they're loyal to profit. And unless we withdraw our interest, unless we withdraw our energy, they will keep doing it. And what Jesus does is he says to people, come out of where you are and come into a new place. Wouldn't you be delighted if in 3 or 4 generations there were no more energy drinks on the shelves? Wouldn't you be delighted if all the things that are hurting our bodies, all the sugar, all the salt, all the fat that is being sold to us as delicious and tasty and the latest and the newest and the greatest, wouldn't it be nice if our kids could grow up healthy? Wouldn't it be nice if the line that's called diabetes, which has been going like this, started going like this? Wouldn't it be nice if the line that's called obesity, that's been going like this, started going like this? How will it happen? As each of us begins to make new decisions about what matters in life, and as each of us begins to follow the Spirit and not those who are wanting to control and manipulate us. And in a nutshell, in plain English, for our time, that's the message Jesus was teaching. But the core of it, the thing I'd like you to take home, is that when Jesus stops and talks with that woman, when little Laura Ingalls got involved with that deaf-mute boy, when you get involved with a neighbor in need, the kingdom of God is entering human experience. Your kindness is the gospel. Your generosity is the gospel. And the one thing I would love is to have the kingdom of heaven be discovered within you and communicated through all of your relationships. I'm getting a little bit tired about hearing about a kingdom that's not going to come till after God destroys the earth, destroys all the bad people, and only the good people get to go there. I'm sorry. The kingdom of heaven is right here, right now. It's just that most of us can't experience it because of wrong ideas, wrong beliefs, wrong practices. Friends, the message that I have is getting increasingly simple, even if I can blow wind about it for a long, long time. The message is so simple. Go and be kind to people you meet along the way. Smile, listen, help, accompany. Be with them. And as we begin to do that, we'll be like salt in a bowl of soup. It'll make it taste good again. It'll be like yeast in a loaf of bread. It'll make it rise up all nice and fluffy. The world is waiting for all of us, each of us, to go and make a difference. And that difference is so simple. Be kind to one another in the name of God. Amen.